In Bucharest, Romania, there is a building so heavy it sinks 6 millimeters into the ground every year. It cost an estimated $3 billion to build, demolishing 5% of the city's historic center to make room for it. The man who ordered it built was executed before it was finished. It has been 35 years. 70% of the building is still empty. It costs 6 million euros a year just to keep the lights on, and they can't afford to turn all of them on. Nobody knows what to do with it. Nobody has ever known. Stand in Constitution Square in Bucharest. Look down the boulevard, which was designed to be wider than the Champs-Élysées. At the end of it sits the Palace of the Parliament. It does not look like a seat of government. It looks like someone tried to build a small city and then put a roof over it. 84 meters above ground. 92 meters below it. The building is deeper underground than it is tall above. 4.1 million tons of marble, steel, crystal, and concrete, by mass the heaviest building on Earth. 365,000 square meters of floor space. 1,100 rooms in the original plan. More than 100,000 light bulbs across nearly 500 chandeliers. You do not need a political education to feel that something here is wrong. This is the world's largest civilian administrative building, valued as of 2020 at around 4 billion euros. 70% of it is empty. It costs 6 million euros a year to heat and light. The exterior lighting alone runs to 1.5 million euros a year, and they don't turn all of it on. They can't afford to. So why is it still here? Because the man it was built for is dead. And the country that inherited it does not have a politically acceptable way to walk away from a 4 billion euro liability that sits at the end of its capital's most photographed avenue. Romanians have a nickname for it that says everything in one word. Sosima, a portmanteau of Ceaușescu and Hiroshima. That is what the city calls the thing it cannot remove. To understand the trap, you have to understand the moment it began. On the 4th of March 1977, a magnitude 7.2 earthquake struck Bucharest. Over 1,400 people died. 33 large buildings collapsed. Nicolae Ceaușescu, inspired by a 1971 visit to Pyongyang, used the earthquake as a pretext for a project he called systematization, a plan to demolish historic Bucharest and replace it with socialist grandeur, with the palace as its centerpiece. He took a disaster that killed 1,400 people and turned it into planning permission for his own monument. 1/6 of Bucharest's historic center was demolished to make room. 19 Orthodox churches, 6 synagogues, 3 monasteries, a hospital, a stadium, 30,000 homes. More than 40,000 people forcibly relocated. The Uranus district, one of the most historic, hilly, and picturesque neighborhoods in a city once called Little Paris, ceased to exist. Bucharest's 19th century streets were bulldozed for the largest single client in the country. Then they built it. Between 20,000 and 100,000 workers, 3 shifts around the clock. The official death toll during construction is listed as 27. Workers who were on site have described a number in the hundreds, possibly thousands. Official tour guides are reportedly not permitted to answer questions about how many people died. Read those 2 numbers next to each other. 27 on the record, hundreds to thousands off it. The building still holds whatever it holds. Then, on the 25th of December 1989, Ceaușescu was executed. The building was somewhere between 60 and 70% complete. And here is the moment most people skip over. Nobody stopped building it. That is the decision Romania has never really discussed. After the revolution, the new democratic government kept paying workers to finish a palace designed by, and for, a dictator who had just been shot on Christmas Day. The cranes did not come down. The construction crews did not go home. The palace kept rising, funded now by the democracy that had just overthrown the man whose monument it was. You can argue why. Pride, stubbornness, the cost of stopping, the cost of demolishing, the political impossibility of any single party saying, we are going to flatten the most visible symbol of national trauma. Whatever the reason, the answer was, keep building. And once you make that choice, the building owns you, not the other way around. In 1990, a way out walked in. Rupert Murdoch reportedly offered $1 billion for the building. Romania rejected the bid. Read that as a number, $1 billion in cash. To a country that had just emerged from a communist regime with empty foreign reserves in the middle of an economic collapse. They turned it down. Because there was no politically acceptable way to sell the most prominent symbol of national suffering to a foreign media billionaire. So they kept paying to finish it instead. You might think Romania inherited an embarrassing palace and made the best of it. Moved the parliament in. Filled the rest with offices. Awkward but manageable. That is the wrong story. As of 2020, the palace is valued at around 4 billion euros and costs 6 million euros a year in energy alone. But 70% of its rooms remain empty. Only about 400 of the 1,100 planned rooms were ever finished. The parliament occupies a fraction of the space. The rest generates no revenue, performs no function, and costs money every hour of every day. The building sinks 6 millimeters a year under its own weight. That figure is widely cited, while satellite radar surveys over part of the 2010s found smaller, but differential movement across different sections, which is its own kind of warning because uneven settlement is worse for a structure than even sinking. And it sits in one of Europe's most seismically active zones. The same fault that produced the 1977 earthquake that gave Ceaușescu his excuse. The palace was not specifically designed for the version of itself that exists today. 4.1 million tons, sinking unevenly in earthquake country, with reportedly visible cracks on some walls, according to visitor accounts. So Romania did not inherit a palace. It inherited a hostage situation in concrete. Now look at the menu of options. Demolish it. You are talking about tearing down a 4 billion euro structure that would cost vastly more to remove than it can ever earn, in the capital of a country that can barely maintain it as it stands. Sell it. Romania rejected $1 billion in 1990 and has no more politically acceptable buyer today than it did then. Fill it. 70% of the rooms have no function a democratic government needs, and heating the empty space alone burns millions a year. Convert it for tourism, for offices, for culture. Proposals have circulated for decades. Nothing has moved at the scale this building requires. Do nothing, and a building sinking unevenly in earthquake country continues to deteriorate while costing 6 million euros a year just to keep the lights on. Every option is bad. The building was designed for a government that no longer exists, at a scale no successor government can actually use, with a cost no successor government can easily stop paying. That is the late trap, and it has been holding since the day Ceaușescu died. Walk the corridors now and you find the absurd shape of the answer they have settled for. So little of the palace is actually used that, by some accounts, rooms inside it can be rented for events at reasonable prices, though few people in Bucharest seem to know the venue is even available. The 100,000 light bulbs across nearly 500 chandeliers are not all switched on, because the electricity bill, if they were, would be unsustainable. The corridors stretch on past closed doors, behind which sit hundreds of finished rooms with no occupants. And in 2015, inside this building, Romania opened the Museum of Communist Totalitarianism. Read that one more time. A museum about the crimes of the communist regime, opened inside the most extreme physical expression of that regime's power. The building is now a museum about itself. Underneath all of it, 92 meters down, there is still the nuclear bunker. 20 kilometers of tunnels connect to state institutions across the city. Ceaușescu was building for a war that never came, against an enemy he never had to fight. The bunker is intact. The dictator who feared the war is dead. The palace above is sinking into the ground he displaced thousands of people from. So this is the palace of the parliament. The man who ordered it was executed 35 years ago. The democracy that replaced him is still paying the electricity bill. The lights flicker in empty corridors built for a version of Romania that existed for 1 decade and then disappeared. Creating a landmark is easier than removing one. A government can be overthrown in days. This building lasts longer. 40,000 people were moved to make space for this. Their neighborhoods are gone. The structure they were moved for is still standing. It is getting lower very slowly every single year. And nobody in 35 years has figured out what comes next.